Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 9th of January 2012, the podcast that's squeaky clean and what a sheen. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's use the shoestring of logic to garrote the news of the bogus. George Carlin said that there should be two requirements for police officers, intelligence and decency. He lamented that neither of these has ever been tried. Well, it's not looking any better today. The Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New York has upheld a decision saying that the city of New London, Connecticut can reject a police candidate because his IQ is too high. Robert Jordan is a 49-year-old college graduate who, on the entrance exam, scored a 33, which corresponds to an IQ of about 125. But the police only interviewed those who scored under 27. Jordan alleges this is discrimination, but the courts have disagreed. How sad is it that our society feels we can't have intelligent police? Or do they just want cops on the lower end of the scale so they'll be more willing to be puppets of a corrupt government that continually wants them to violate the Constitution they swore an oath to uphold? Remember that New London is the city that destroyed the Constitution when the Kelo House and others were taken through eminent domain by the city after years of legal action that ultimately resulted in a Supreme Court so they could give it to Pfizer to build a new headquarters that supposedly would generate economic growth. The city was victorious, but the project was a failure, and the site where these homes once stood is now used as a dump site for construction debris. Maybe that's another reason they want cops with low IQs. The politicians don't want the police outsmarting them. Intelligence on the police force can only be a benefit to the people. The politicians and the courts are all but saying that the police aren't really there to protect and serve the people. The only alternative is that they are there to protect and serve the politicians, and none of them care about the people. Considering the actions of so many police around the country, this seems to be a widespread issue, and one that has little hope of being corrected anytime in the near future. In more stupid court tricks, a Jackson, Mississippi woman accused of killing her 3-year-old daughter is waiting to stand trial, and has been for almost 9 years. In all that time, she's been sitting in prison without bail. Every now and then, Tina Funderburk is taken from the Hinds County Jail to the state hospital at Whitfield to undergo yet another psychiatric evaluation. Over the years, the doctors working for the state have had trouble evaluating her. They say she has paranoid schizophrenia, but the question is whether or not her mental illness makes her competent to stand trial. Without a trial, she has no opportunity to either demonstrate her innocence or to demonstrate that she's insane and therefore not culpable for the crime. As it is, she appears to be in a holding pattern, with doctors going back and forth, nothing getting done, and her counsel, a public defender, apparently not doing much about it. Why would they be doing this? The details of the case tell an interesting story. They claim that Funderburk suffocated her child, but the only evidence they have is her skeletal remains found months later in a swampy area. Could it be they don't have enough evidence to convict, and so they're undergoing this merry-go-round of injustice just to try to keep her wrongfully imprisoned? Regardless, this is a blatant violation of Funderburk's constitutional rights to a fair and speedy public trial. Martin Luther King said that justice delayed is justice denied. He was right. Here's hoping the little media attention this case has garnered will result in some action being taken one way or the other. We've been covering the U.S. government's hideously unconstitutional efforts to block the entire domains of sites where a big media company just claims there is infringing content. The Obama administration started doing it on their own, and now Congress has introduced SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, to make it at least technically federal law. Although it still wouldn't be no act that contravenes the Constitution as law. Of course, many of these are overseas websites with overseas domains, so their reach is limited. So the US government has taken to bullying other countries into playing along. In one example, the US threatened sanctions against Spain if they didn't implement a similar site blocking law. Thanks once again to WikiLeaks, over 100 different communiques between US and Spanish authorities showed that the US helped draft copyright legislation and shape the policy of both the current government and the opposition. In one, they expressed anger at the Spanish president when it was obvious that an attempt to pass a site blocking law would fail. In a letter from U.S. Ambassador Alan D. Solomont, the U.S. government stated, quote, "The government has ultimately failed to finish the job for political reasons, to the detriment of the reputation and economy of Spain." Hey, how about letting Spaniards decide that for themselves? Included in the letter was a threat. If the law isn't passed, then Spain would be subjected to trade barriers and placed on a priority watch list. They threatened the same sanctions against Spain as are made against countries that breach trade agreements. After the old president left, the new president's government passed and fully implemented the law within 10 days of taking office. In the 19th century, America spread freedom and liberty throughout the world, and we didn't do it with the military or sanctions. Our example stood as testament to the wealth and prosperity that was available for all citizens in a free society, and as a result, many countries changed or even replaced their governments to gain more freedom for the people. In the 20th century, America was at least spreading the ideals of self-determination, even if it was at the point of a gun. But now what is America spreading? Nothing but corporatism, cronyism, and tyranny, the destruction of free speech and free association, so that corporations can force their outdated 20th century business model into profitability. This has to stop. It's high time we reversed this course and became the beacon of liberty again. And if we do, the people of the world will see clearly how much better off they are for it, how much wealthier, how much more prosperous, how much healthier, and how much better able to pursue happiness. And maybe the members of the RIAA and the MPAA will see that too. And now it's time to scrape the slag from the top of this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And the primary election season officially started with the Iowa caucuses, conclusively showing that no matter what happens in the future, it won't be boring. And right behind it came the news media coverage of it, conclusively showing that no matter what happens in the future, it won't be intelligent. The Bogosity can be seen all over the news media. Case in point, an article from the Christian Science Monitor, which did a very good job encapsulating some of the bogus arguments floating around other news sources. We're talking major fail, like still insisting that their bogus, unscientific polls are better than actual election results. They quote Jennifer Rubin of the Washington Post, saying that the Republican nominee needs to be staunchly in favor of a military option against Iran. The fact that all of the evidence points against Iran being able to gain nuclear ability, and that even if they did, they would be one among dozens, and Iran has never attacked another country in its history anyway, are, of course, conveniently ignored. Not to be out-moroned, the Washington Times posted a screed from Eric Golub with the self-important title, "The Paul bots 15 minutes are up." Why does he say it's over for Ron Paul? Because almost 80% of Iowa voters chose someone other than Paul. By that logic, and I use the term loosely, over 75% of them voted for someone other than Mitt Romney. Same with Rick Santorum. And over 86% of them voted for someone other than Newt Gingrich, whom the media is still attempting to make relevant by claiming he outpolls Ron Paul. Listen to Golub's almost sadistic rhetoric. Quote, "The grand old party held a primary, and as normal, mainstream candidates won. Sure, the third place candidate has supporters claiming that third is really first. The third best football team does not even get to the Super Bowl, much less win it." What neither Golub nor most other media outlets are reporting is that the race was a three-way tie in the only way that mattered, the number of delegates to the Republican National Convention that each candidate earned. Romney, Santorum, and Paul all came away with 6 delegates each. Remember that it's the delegates who actually nominate the presidential candidate. Remember also that the delegates do more than that. They rewrite the platform as well, and if Paul gets a significant number of delegates at the convention, they can have a positive effect in altering the platform to a more libertarian policy. Don't think the Republican leaders aren't afraid of that. We saw in 2008 that they will resort to breaking their own rules and even engaging in outright fraud to stop this from happening. Paul's supporters need to keep a very close eye on what happens at state conventions and be ready to blow the whistle on any shenanigans. All of this might explain Golub's vitriol, with phrases such as, all quotes, "Jew hatred disguised as non-interventionism," "dopey automatons under 25," or even completely wrong things like, "For every current military person or veteran who supported Dr. Paul, there were plenty of those fine men and women backing other candidates." When the real data show that Paul got more donations from veterans and more donations from active duty service members than all the other GOP candidates combined. If the Washington Times wanted to prove how desperate and idiotic and irrelevant they are, they just did it. As did the Huffington Post, if it actually needed to anymore. They even went so far as to quote Eric Donderow of all people. If you haven't heard of him, well, you shouldn't. He's a right-wing neocon and paranoid conspiracy theorist who used to work for Ron Paul and whom some people suspect was really the one behind the racist statements in the newsletter. Donderow was also the media's source for these statements and has been on an anti-Paul crusade for many years. Here we see a news outlet quoting him with legitimacy when he's really little more than an internet troll. They mentioned a recent interview with Jake Tapper, who brought up yet again the 9/11 conspiracy theories that Paul never even once said he agrees with, and on many occasions has said the opposite. And they call his naturally indignant reaction to this association being brought up yet again as flipping out. Well, listen for yourself.
One of your former close aides recently
Actually, that would be Eric Donderow again. Apparently, he's the only source for bad Ron Paul quotes.
It's recently said that you, quote, engaged in conspiracy theories, including perhaps the 9/11 attacks were coordinated with the CIA, and that the Bush administration might have known about the attacks ahead of time. So, have you ever expressed in front of anyone...
No, wait. Don't go any further than that. That's complete nonsense.
It's nonsense.
Just stop that.
Not
nonsense.
True.
I did not. I never bought into that stuff. I never talked about it.
Okay.
About the conspiracy of Bush knowing about this? No, come on. Let's be reasonable.
Okay.
That's just off the wall.
And that is flipping out? Of all the news media coverage, most of it was either marginalizing Ron Paul or ignoring him entirely. But there was one outlet I saw actually give fair coverage to him, but that was the BBC. What does it say that you have to go out of the country to actually get fair and accurate reporting on America's elections? This is what happens when the news media is not a free market, but a highly corporatized market where the press becomes a special class of people with rights and privileges above the rest of us. They have their own agenda, and it is not to keep you informed. And that is why this week the American news media as a whole has once again come to the front of the pack as this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now it's time to mark a failing grade for this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
French nutritionist and moron Pierre Ducan thinks he has just the perfect solution to the issue of childhood obesity, and our schools are the solution. No, it isn't better education about nutrition or health or exercise or anything of that nature. His solution is to give extra exam points to skinnier students. The extra points will be given to any student with a body mass index, or BMI, less than 25. Ducan claims it's a great motivator to get kids to lose weight and eat healthy. Yeah, right. Let's start with the fact that BMI is a bogus metric to begin with. It dates from the early 1800s and wasn't even supposed to be a measure of obesity or be used for any kind of medical diagnosis whatsoever. Not only that, but it just looks at your height and weight. There is no consideration whatsoever for how much of your weight is healthy, dense muscle tissue and how much is fat. According to the BMI scale, George Clooney is overweight and Arnold Schwarzenegger is obese. So already, right off the bat, probably the healthiest kids in school who work out and have the most muscle mass will lose out. But what's even worse is the fact that this divides kids into different classes. Based solely on height and weight, some kids will get better marks than others, even if they don't deserve it. When I was in school, I was a beanpole, and I ate junk food and drank sodas all the time. It's just the way my biology works. Whereas other people eat healthy and exercise and are naturally larger. To say that I would have deserved better grades just because I was skinny should be unthinkable to anyone in the developed world. I mean, really, a lot has been made about the problems of school children bullying fat kids. But what is this proposal other than institutionalized bullying? And teachers would be paid to do it. They'd even be required to do it. This is social engineering, plain and simple. It's not what our schools are supposed to be doing. Of course, they're already doing too much of it in too many other ways, but the fact that this time it's based not only on moronic misinformation, but also amounts to bullying, makes Pierre Ducan this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Well, that wraps up this distensible edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and participate in discussions about these subjects and anything else you like. And if you'd like to participate in the Bogosity podcast, you can send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. If you put it in an MP3 file, it just might get played in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Harry Browne. Yes, there are incompetents in this world, just as there are evildoers and frauds. That's why we must reduce government to a fraction of its current size to take away the power that enables incompetents, evildoers, and frauds to run our lives. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License.